Hi, and welcome to Linguistics After Dark. I'm Eli.
I'm Jenny.
And I'm Sarah. If you've got a question about language and you want experts to answer it without having done any research whatsoever, we're your podcast.
Settle in, grab a snack or a drink, and enjoy. How's it going, Sarah?
It's going okay. I think the horrendous heat wave might finally be about to break.
Gosh, I hope so. It is hot and humid and has been.
Yeah. I don't know when this is going to come out, but we're recording in early August, and Massachusetts is not having a good time.
We are suffering, because if it is not like 90 degrees and 90% humidity, it is pouring from the skies.
Speaking of Massachusetts, before we get into drinks and things, I have a fun fact for you.
Oh?
Although I need to find it so that I quote it correctly.
Is it that Massachusetts residents eat the most ice cream per capita of any state in the country?
No, I didn't know that.
I was very surprised to hear that when I moved here. Apparently it is the case. Though it's all hard serve. They don't have any soft serve here.
There's a few places that do good soft serve.
Are they all named things that are legally distinct from Dairy Queen? Because that's how you know that a place like that is good.
That's true. I mean, the hard serve place near me just added like 20 different soft serve flavors.
I'm not. I wouldn't touch that with 10-foot pole.
I've enjoyed the ones I've
had. Chocolate, vanilla, and twist. That's.
I mean, they've had those for years. And they used to do like one flavor of the month or whatever, and now they've just like kept all of them. No, my fun fact is about the town of Southwick, Massachusetts, which is way out west. I think just north of Granby, Connecticut.
If you're paying attention, by the way, that's spelled SOUTHWYIGHTCKPQRFML.
Sure. No, this came up actually just last night because I was hanging out on Slack with friend of the show Bex, and listeners, if you're not on our Slack server yet, you should be.
Join the Slack. Yeah, come on. We have a whole linguistics channel.
We do. It often takes over the rest of the channels. Also, you get to participate in nonsense like, why is there this weird little jog from Massachusetts into Connecticut for like 1 mile? That's not the fun fact. The fun fact is...
You can't just say that.
I think the answer was there was a dispute over the border, and then in 18-something, somebody was like, this is the border now, even though it looks dumb.
Okay, that's fair.
And we've run with it.
That's less interesting than I thought it would be. Okay.
It was much less interesting than we hoped. But in the other, like, facts about the town that Bex found on Wikipedia, a notable person from Southwick, Massachusetts, is Matthew Laughlin, or Laughlin, I don't know, Laflin, known as an American businessman, philanthropist, and what?
Unit of measure.
Founder of Chicago.
Really? Like the city, not the band?
Like the city. Like the city. I did check.
I mean, somebody had to have done it, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, granted, though, there have been settlements on that spot for a long time before he came along, we do have to say.
That's true. I did not click through to read the details of how he founded Chicago, so that's left as an exercise to the listener.
Judging from the number of Midwestern expats that I have met since I've moved here, the scales are starting to balance a little bit.
So true. Although it's definitely increasing, because, like, when I was in college, being from Ohio was more exotic and interesting than being from China, but that may have also just been a college-age person in Boston thing rather than a Massachusetts writ large thing.
That's the first time that I would have ever heard of somebody calling being from Ohio exotic.
Well, that is exactly the point.
What are you drinking, Sarah?
I was listening to the episode we just released, which I think was episode 11, where I made some kind of weird cocktail thing and said, I'll have to name this later and I'll mention it next time. Pretty sure that never happened. I have another unnamed cocktail, so maybe this will just be our, like...
Sarah's unnamed cocktail corner?
Yeah, something like that. This is some bourbon, some butterscotch schnapps, and some of those fancy cherries. Ooh. And a little bit of water.
Bourbon, butterscotch, and Cherries. You couldn't have had a third ingredient that started with a B?
No.
Okay. I don't know. It's got old-fashioned vibes.
Yeah, I don't know if butterscotch. I need something bitter, I guess, for that.
That's like an old candy shop or something like that. It's like an
That's good, I like
old-fashioned
that.
candy shop.
Old-fashioned candy shop. PPE at the end, of course.
Yes, of course.
All right. What about you?
I am drinking this newly discovered cocktail called a glass of water with some ice in it.
That sounds so
Because
interesting.
it is hot outside.
Now you need a third ingredient that's made of H2O.
Yeah, I often will just like put a little dash of bitters in water, and it like just adds a little something to it. It's kind of nice, especially if you have filtered water. It like puts a little taste back in, you know.
Yeah, it's not that dissimilar to like a little bit of lemon or something.
Mhm.
Makes sense. Cool.
And usually I don't have like an open lemon to hand, but
Yeah.
I do have a thing of bitters.
Yeah, that's true. All right. Well, shall we dive in?
Yeah, let's learn a language thing.
Cool. What you got for us?
So the language thing of the day is vowel shifts, and that's with a V, and that's the last time we're going to make that joke during this segment. So a vowel shift is a change in what vowels go in what words. And you might be like, okay, but like the words don't change, so how can the vowels change? And let's remember that all vowels are fake. And when we say that, the reason that we say that, like vowel shifts are an example of that, because
Vowels are the same vowel.
yeah, exactly. And the reason that we like say that all vowels are fake and all vowels are the same vowel is because there is a continuum in your mouth from one vowel to another. So we have the different vowels on the IPA chart, and those are different localities for where your tongue is when you are saying those vowels. But like, there's nothing that prevents your tongue from being a little higher or a little further forward, or your lips from being sort of somewhat rounded instead of unrounded or rounded, that kind of thing. So vowels shift around all the time. You know, there is a really fantastic vowel shift that happened a while ago in English. In fact, we call it the Great Vowel Shift. And that was happening around the time of Shakespeare. So it's a nice like coincidence that we have like a lot of preserved text from when this vowel shift was happening, because it lets us reconstruct a lot of stuff that was sort of before and after and in flux and that kind of thing. It is also a little unfortunate that that's about when printing was starting to happen in England. William Caslin, it's a whole thing, but if printing had happened in England like 50 years before or 50 years after, our spellings would be kind of different, because they wouldn't be trying to reconcile a bunch of different sort of pronunciations and a bunch of different sort of like dialect words for things. But we're not talking about printing. We're talking about vowel shifts. So in order to talk about vowels, to talk about the mouth, your mouth has some parts that are relevant for this. You've got your tongue. Where you place your tongue during saying a vowel is what determines what vowel it is, along with whether your lips are rounded, sort of in an O shape, or not. Though you can have an unrounded version of O, which is O, which you may not be able to tell the difference if you don't speak a language that doesn't have it. Your tongue can be high, it can be low, it can be towards the front of your mouth or towards the back of your mouth, or kind of in the middle. And then you can have what we call the tense lax distinction, but which English teachers insist on calling the long-short distinction, because in a previous version of English, which no one in the past several centuries has ever spoken. Oh, I'm getting the finger from Sarah. She wants to jump in. These vowels were long and short. English does have long and short vowels, but they are not the distinction between long and short. All right, phonetician or phonologist, jump on in.
Yes. I would argue, not having looked at a chart about this recently, that we do still have long and short. The problem is that they overlay, like the Venn diagram is a circle, basically. For long vowels are tense and short vowels are lax. And so while it is accurate to describe this as a short vowel, when modern English speakers think of it, what they're actually thinking about is the difference between tense and laxness. And so those terms in layman's usage have gotten very muddy.
Yeah, okay. I mean, that is fair. That's a fair way to think about it. But I think if you a normal English speaker are sitting there saying like but versus boot or like bait versus bet, right? By the way, those are tense lax pairs. You are not going to be able to perceive a timing difference in the way that there are languages out there, and English used to be one of them, that actually have a long vowel, short vowel distinction.
Yeah, so English has long and short, but they're no longer informative. They're not distinct. I mean, that's basically the point I was making. They're not distinct from the tenseness of the vowel anymore. And so, even though we still describe them that way, what we're really getting at is the tenseness rather than the length. And we've just sort of gone really hard with the wrong vocab.
Yeah, that's fair. Anyway, I want to get back to parts of the mouth. So up at the top, you've got I, E, U, In the middle, you've got your A, you've got your O and your and also schwa is like in the middle of everything, so it's just kind of the neutral vowel. And then down at the bottom, you've got your a, you've got your you've got your ah. There's a slant sort of at the front of your mouth, so your e can be a lot further forward than all of your sort of, I would call them A vowels, even though A is a mid vowel. All your vowels that are spelled in English with A's, with the letter A in them. You know, your and and all of that stuff.
Yeah, if you went straight up from a, which is about as far front as you can go at the bottom, you would wind up fairly well behind E,
yes,
which is the far front of the top.
So that's a tour around your mouth. And the thing to know about vowel shifts is that it's not one single vowel moving. So you don't just have like one vowel in one sort of set of circumstances changing. When there's a vowel shift, that vowel moving sort of leaves space for other vowels to move into place. And so most vowel shifts are not just one vowel, they're sort of a whole cycle of vowels moving out of place and replacing each other or shifting a little bit. And it happens bit by bit over time. And a lot of times people don't even know that they have that vowel shift because, and it will happen within your lifetime. Like it'll happen over the course of 20 years. So if you heard yourself previously, you might notice that there was a change. But people don't actually hear that they have changed the vowel. The other thing to note about this is, and this is very relevant if you go and talk about the great vowel shift, which we're actually not going to talk about, but I will talk about it for just a second, which is that you can also get vowels that turn into diphthongs as part of this. So the great vowel shift in particular, E, like it was a shift that shifted things upwards in some part of its shift. And so things that like E and U that could not go higher broke and turned into diphthongs, basically. So there is some of that. The last thing that I want to talk about, vowel mergers. So sometimes you don't have things moving out and then something moving in. Sometimes you've got a dialect where the two different vowels from another dialect manifest as the same vowel in one. We talk about caught all the time, but recently, actually, I was having a discussion about the father-bother merger, which...
The who what?
Father-bother. So I clearly have the father-bother merger.
Likewise.
But if you are Australian, you do not think that father and bother rhyme. And you think that it is nuts that father and bother might rhyme. And I'm not going to attempt an Australian accent. You've got...
Can you describe
so
which other words would use the same vowels as
them?
them?
So the vowel in bother is O. So you get father and bother. And I was very skeptical of this. I was like, that does not make sense. And then the person that I was talking to very kindly recorded him saying this. I have no idea. There's no way that Bill from Escape This Podcast listens to our podcast. If you do, shout out and thank you. There is no way. But yeah, he recorded that for me and I was like, that's O. That's just straight up O. I think it is slightly different. His partner has a linguistics background, said it was slightly different, but that's the direction.
Interesting.
Guess that's part of my grammar now. There we go. That's our new piece of merch. I guess that's part of my grammar now. I'll accept that into my idiolect.
Yes. Grammar accepted. It's like headcanon accepted.
Exactly, yeah.
For linguists.
Okay, so now we know about vowel shifts and how they usually work. We know the various parts of the mouth. I did not really go into rounded, unrounded, because in English, it's sort of the same thing as like long and short. We don't have a rounded, unrounded distinction that matters. We just have vowels that happen to be rounded and happen to be unrounded. If you study other languages, actually, you are a native English speaker, one of the things to look at is whether they have a vowel that is the same as in English but is unrounded or is rounded. And that may help you sound like a native speaker, actually, because you won't perceive that difference. But if you learn to make that difference, then it will help you.
Can I give one quick example of that?
Sure.
There's a sound in French and in like standard Mandarin pronunciation. In Mandarin, it's the pinyin with the U and the two dots over it. And in French, it's the vowel in the second person singular tu, which I would tell you how to spell, except that French spelling is worse than English spelling at description of that nature. So we're just going to skip that. I had such an easier time when I was studying Chinese figuring out how to say that because I had already taken phonetics. And so as my teacher is trying to describe, oh, you say E, but then you close your mouth and you say U. And I was like, oh, yes, I've done this in my phonetics class. Like the English, the U sound. Yeah.
E.
So the English U sound is the same as the pinyin U without the dots and as vous, the formal pronoun. But if you move it forward but keep your lips rounded, which is easiest for an English speaker to think of rather than moving the U sound forward, is to say E and then close your lips while you make the same sound. So E, U. That's the vowel with the dots or the tu. So you have tu and vu or U and U.
Very cool.
In Chinese.
Yeah, my example of that is the U sound in Japanese. The Japanese vowels are very often said to be the same as the Spanish vowels, but U in Japanese is unrounded, and it's hard for an English speaker to hear that, and you can get away with it being rounded, but if you learn that and you start saying unrounded U, all of a sudden you will sound like a better Japanese speaker.
That one blew my mind when I learned it a few years ago, because neither of my Japanese teachers had ever, mentioned it. We did not spend much time on pronunciation, so I was just like, oh, this is an U sound, got it. And then after I had taken all my Japanese classes and graduated, oh yeah, it's unrounded. It was like, now you tell me.
Yeah, I had Japanese teachers in college who literally had written papers on Japanese linguistics, and neither of them decided to ever mention it to us.
Every modern language teacher should be required to take intro phonetics and then should be required to add that relevant
that would
part
be so
to
useful.
their
I liked my Japanese teachers. Both of them were great, but I really feel like more time on phonetics, even just one extra day, a better explanation the one day we actually talked about them would have helped a lot. But it wasn't their fault, this clearly
Well, and I'm sure that there are dialects out there where it's rounded, and I'm sure that there's all kinds of stuff. I'm sure that all sorts of vowel shifts have happened between all of those dialects, he said, wrenching us
segueing back into the topic.
So I said we're not going to talk about the Great Vowel Shift. That is the vowel shift that everybody talks about when they talk about vowel shifts. It was huge. It affected a ton of English pronunciation. To some extent, it lost us the short-long distinction. There are diphthongs involved. It's a big thing. We're not going to talk about it. I'm from Illinois. Sarah's from Ohio. We are going to talk about the Northern Cities vowel shift. Also because that's the vowel shift that is happening in the United States right now. It's happening before your very eyes. And actually, when I was studying linguistics in Wisconsin, it was starting to take over Madison. So you could hear it happen. And you could hear a distinction in accent between people who had come to Madison from Chicago and Milwaukee and other cities along the Great Lakes, and people who came from other parts of the state who didn't have that shift yet, or who had a slightly different shift called the Pennsylvania shift, which we're not going to talk about, and which is also at this point, I think, it lost to the Northern Cities shift. But it was happening while we were there, and so our sociolinguistics professors were very excited about that.
That's so cool.
I'm not a phonologist. If only we had a phonologist.
Oh man, I wonder where we can find
Sarah,
one.
do you know any phonologists?
Oh, hi, I'm here. I wish I had a better response to that question. That's what I got. Yeah, so actually I'm a little bit annoyed that I've never heard of the Pennsylvania shift. That, like, you are saying that, and that's the first time I'm hearing about it, and I'm going to have to go on a wiki walk about that later. The Northern Cities shift is really cool, and I did my linguistics degree in Boston, so I didn't experience this as a student, but I experienced it a little bit in the sense that we talked about it in class, and I said, I'm from one of those cities. I recognize part of what you're saying as true, not in my speech, but in the speech of people around me, but not all of this. This feels like it hasn't fully taken hold. And then I feel like that might have been a fall semester, and over the New Year's break, I was hanging out with my family, and I said, I don't know about the rest of them. And I was like, them? Who put a U in the word them?
I have to tell you, I didn't
like,
even detect the changed vowel in what you just said.
And I caught myself saying it, and I was like, oh, yeah, I am from here, aren't I? And I don't know if that was because I was with my family or just that that's where I was when I said the thing and had learned about it, whatever. But the Northern Cities shift, or Northern Cities vowel shift, when we talk about the Northern Cities, what we mean is the ones basically surrounding the Great Lakes, and a bit further south. So I'm looking at the map that's on the Inland North American English Wikipedia page, which basically has a bunch of cities along the Great Lakes, but also all the way down to Allentown in Pennsylvania, which is close to Philadelphia, and St. Louis, which
is not on a Great Lake.
Is not on a Great Lake.
It
is barely
river.
In the north. It's on a very good river, that is true.
But that is not the same as a Great Lake.
It's not the same. I think we talked last episode about how 3 out of the 5 Great Lakes just mean giant lake.
Yes.
So the Mississippi River, while impressive, is different.
I am pretty sure, we have done no research for this podcast. I am pretty sure, though, that Mississippi means giant river.
Giant river? Yeah, I was going to say, I think that's true. I am confident, however, that rivers and lakes are distinct.
Yes.
Pretty significant difference there. Anyway.
This is not hydrology after dark, though.
Somebody please make a supercut of all of the this is not blank after dark things Eli has ever said.
I gotta keep us on topic.
I know. I just love that that's your phrasing. It's great. The Northern City shift, like Eli alluded to, is one of those ones where one vowel moves, another vowel moves, another vowel moves. It's often called a chain shift.
It's like vowel musical chairs.
It's hard to tell if it's musical chairs or it's the engine of a train, like, starting and kind of tugging everything along behind it, or if it's like a domino pushing from the back and everything falling forward in front of it. It's probably all of those, depending on which particular pronunciation happens first and takes hold and starts shoving other vowels out of its way. The Northern City shift, I don't actually know where it started, but there is a pretty consistent mapping at this point of which sounds have moved to which places. And you may hear it referred to as the Chicago accent, the Detroit accent, the whatever, like basically blank accent, insert a northern city here. The other thing that I want to point out as we start to talk about this is that the IPA is super useful, right? We have talked about the fact that there is a designated symbol and a designated description, you know, high, tense, front, unrounded, and that looks like a lowercase I, right? But when it comes to vowel shifts, when it comes to the kind of sociolinguistics or the phonological realizations of these underlying sounds, one of the things that linguists often do is refer to the vowel in a given word, and they will pick a word. And I think there's a technical name for the word that they pick, and I don't know it, but they will pick a designated word to be the representative of all words that have that vowel.
Well, this makes sense, because if the vowel changes, you want to say, oh, it went from a front, high, tense, whatever, to a, front mid tense or whatever the change is going to be.
And if you're like, the E vowel, which is pronounced I, is just not helpful.
Right, exactly.
Like, that is defeating the entire purpose of naming the vowels. So we've chosen a different way to name them. We talk about the caught merger. I don't actually know if caught and caught are the kind of emblematic words for those sounds, or if that's just the convenient North American version.
So I think there's often different words that are used in different places.
That makes sense.
So I remember being taught that like B_T is a valid word for almost every vowel in English. And so sometimes you might say the bot vowel or the bit vowel. For example, even though there is bot, people don't say like the bot merger. Also because bot is not a word outside of the Thai currency.
What do you mean? Like a robot?
I guess there is.
But that's
now,
only if you have the father-bother merger also.
Oh, I guess,
so,
yes.
Dear God.
Right, so you can see why we choose these words. But I don't think that they sort of are that forever. I think it's in that context we're using this word, especially because it is subject to this shift or this merger that we're talking about.
The example that I want to give here, I actually don't think is relevant to the northern cities shift, but it is the place I can best explain what I'm trying to say, which is the word trap, which when we're talking about these sort of emblematic words, you'll often see them written in all small caps as a stylization feature to be like, I'm talking about the concept of this word, however it's realized in your dialect. In the northern cities, and in, I would say, the majority of North America, asterisk, citation needed, didn't research this part, trap and bath have the same vowel, which is the low.
Well, yeah, what other vowel would they have?
Well, for some Boston dialects, trap continues to have ash, that front low, whatever, unrounded vowel, and both has whatever that vowel is. And I don't know what the rules are for what distinguishes them. I just know that I moved to Boston in college, and the majority of people that I interacted with were also transplants to Boston, or grew up here as a second-generation transplant, and had spent so much time on the internet and the TV and whatever that accents are fake and everybody just speaks normal anyway, yada yada yada, old man yells at cloud. But there were a few people I worked with who were in their 50s, who had lived in Boston all their lives, who had lived in the parts of Boston that have those really strong local towny accents. And like the secretary at one of my jobs, she'd be like, at 5 o'clock, half the people are going to leave. And I'm like, I'm sorry, what? At and half? Like, I could understand if you had switched one of your vowels, but why did you switch only one and not the other, which are the same vowel? But in her dialect, they're not.
Which this is really tough to understand if you have a merger that somebody else doesn't have, because you're like, okay, but the environment is the same. Like, there's no environmental distinction. But you have to understand that for them, underlyingly, it is truly two separate vowels. Yeah. And for you, underlyingly, it is not.
Yeah, it's wild. And so there is a whole family of words, and the only quotes I can come up with are both and hoff, because those are the ones I've seen cited in literature or heard said to me and made me go, what?
That same vowel distinction also, I think, used to be a class distinction in British speech as well. Bath versus both.
I feel like it's also in modern days very present in parts of New Zealand and Australia? ? Somebody fact check that. I feel like I came across it at one point when I was researching New Zealand vowels. Compared to North America, New Zealand has a wild vowel shift. That is so cool.
Yeah, next time that you're watching the Lord of the Rings DVD set and you're listening to the director commentary, just stop listening to the words and just listen to the actual vowels in the words. If you're not a New Zealander, I think your mind will be blown a little bit.
It's really, really impressive. Anyway, I say all of that because as I talk about the northern city shift, I'm going to refer to the blank vowel where I say a word, because I'm going to talk about the different ways it's pronounced, and that's just easier. So, at one end of this chain, we don't know if it's the beginning or the end, but at one end of this chain, the trap vowel, which, again, for most of North American English is an ash, is tensed. And the problem is that it's as far forward as it can get in that bottom space. And so tensing it, I would say, kind of like you were alluding to with the great vowel shift earlier, almost diphthongizes it.
It can't go in that direction, so it has to, like, squeeze its way.
Yeah, it's like,
else.
I gotta tense up, but I'm already pretty tense. I'm in the corner. Like, what do I do?
Move.
So for a lot of people, and in particular, this is one of the sounds that I was consciously aware of in Cleveland even before I moved. Turns into It's almost nasalized. It moves in a couple different ways. But there was one classmate that I had in high school who was kind of a running joke, friendly-wise, but a running joke in our friend group about how she would just say cat and apple. And I genuinely don't think I say that, but occasionally I'll say something, and my husband, who is from Rhode Island, will just be like, Midwestern vowels. And I'm like, yeah.
I definitely say this. I don't have a real explicit, like, cat, but I do have cat. I do have other things that I know I am subject to that vowel change with the
Yeah. It's like a little bit
almost
nasal, a little bit palatalized at the front.
Yep.
I have no idea how I would actually notate it. That's beyond my pay grade.
Someone else's problem. Probably Bill Lobov's.
Listen, if you want to pay me to be a phonetician, we can talk, but until then. Anyway, so that's one of them.
Thanks, Patreon subscribers.
Exactly. And as trap moves out of the very solid, clean ash space into that leaves open ash. And so, as I'm pretty sure we've discussed in a previous episode, the lot, as in I have a lot of cookies over here, the lot vowel starts to move into the ash space. So we talked about going around the black, which if you cut that word out, you're like, oh, black, like the color. And you put it into context and you're like, I parked around the black. And you're like, oh, that's obviously block. So that's one of the moves. As that sound, as the lot vowel, which we can also think of as the cot, as in camp bed vowel, moves forward, the caught vowel, the aw sound, which typically is positioned or diagrammed to be in the very back bottom of the vowel chart, starts to move forward. And so where we typically think of the caught merger as being from this middle kind of neutralish ah sound to this aw, like, aw, man, I'm so embarrassed. You can maintain that distinction, that lack of merger, and yet move both of the sounds forward so that ah, I'm so embarrassed is now this middle sound, and black is up forward as sort of an ash. That one is particularly iconic in Chicago.
Yeah, you get the cat-caught merger.
The cat-caught merger. That's great.
Yeah, the cat-caught merger.
I've never heard that. Why have I never heard that?
Because we don't spell those words differently, even if we pronounce them differently.
Yeah.
And because the distinction just shifted
Yeah,
forward.
that's so cool. Love that.
But yeah, you get that. That's a pretty distinctive Chicago kind of a thing. You park the car in the garage.
The garage.
Like,
oh, I love that.
That has a final devoicing, which is separate. It is not part of this shift, but it is part of a stereotypical
Garage.
Chicago
Yeah,
accent.
that's true.
Accent by way of demonstration. I wonder if you go back and you try to find all the times I've said accent, if you would
Oh, wow, that one was
be
strong.
able to see that there's a shift.
That's so funny.
Okay, so we got cat and caught move forward.
Yep. Cat, the feline, moves up. Caught, the camp bed, moves forward. Caught, I caught a fish, moves forward. That leaves now a gap in that aw sound. So one of the things that moves into there is the sound, the sound in strut or bus. I don't have this one. I cannot
Riding the boss?
The boss, I guess.
Riding the boss?
Is that it?
Yeah. I mean, the thing about these vowel shifts is we are describing them as very distinctive, like changes from one IPA symbol to another IPA symbol, sort of canonically. And they're not. So, yes, I have heard that one, but not to the degree where I would sort of closely notate it totally with an open O.
The other thing is, like you said earlier, this is happening. We are in the middle of it.
Yes, that's true.
And there's a reason we talk about Chicago emphasizing the cat-caught shift there, and that we talk, at least I talk, about the Cleveland because those are the particular vowel shifts that are iconic in those particular locations. Not all of the northern cities have made the same part of the shift at the same time, at the same speed. Come back to us in 20 years. Let's see what's happening. Come back to us in 40 years. Let's see what's happening.
Congratulations, you're living in the middle of an era of linguistic change.
Which, is also true all of the time, but, this is a famous one, so that's kind of cool. I totally believe that there's this bus-boss kind of shift. It's not one I've encountered frequently enough to be like, yeah, totally real. It is logical that that would happen somewhere, because we know that there are other sounds moving into the position, into what I would consider the sound in strut, what I would transcribe with the wedge vowel, and that is what we would call the vowel in dress. Like, I'm getting dressed this morning. I'm putting on my clothes.
And that's what you were talking about earlier with the.
Yeah. Right?
So you'd say getting dressed.
Yeah. And again, because we're in progress, I don't put that in every short E sound. I don't say every.
Or it's not all the way there.
Or it's not all the way there.
It's in transition.
Or,
remember, vowels are fake. They're
vowels
fluid.
are fluid. The other thing is, maybe there's a trap bath distinction type thing, an anti-merger happening at one of these places where underlyingly I discover that dress and them don't actually have the same vowel way down there, and one of them is susceptible to the shift and one of them isn't. That is purely speculation, by the way. I have no idea.
Imagine going your entire life thinking that two vowels were one vowel, and then discovering, because of the northern cities shift,
that they're not.
That they were two vowels all along.
It's wild.
Bum, bum, bum.
Moreover, this one in particular, there's a bit of a struggle because the wedge vowel and the schwa are so similar sounding. And so, am I saying them with a wedge, or am I saying them with a schwa because I'm talking quickly? Hard to say. Would need to do a corpus study of everything I've ever said. Am not going to do that. Although, I suppose there's many hours of me talking on microphone out on the internet now, so if anyone feels like doing that, have at it.
Have at. Yeah, so that's an interesting point, though, because English has this sort of, this strong gravitational pull towards the schwa in unstressed syllables. So if you're trying to think about your own speech or analyzing your friend's family's speech, which is a totally normal activity to do, you have to make sure that you're not confusing some of these shifts or having your sort of observations muddled by everything gravitating towards schwa as well.
Which brings us to our final piece of this chain. Schwa is by far the most common unstressed vowel sound in English. But there is a second one. Eli, do you know what I'm talking about?
I don't, actually.
Okay.
Wait, hold on. Is it for when it's too high for
Exactly.
schwa?
I'm not going to say the phrase I'm thinking of out loud because I want you and I want the listeners to think it or say it out loud themselves before I spoil it. But there's this flower that's really popular in North American culture. It's pink. It has really sharp thorns. I think Shakespeare had a thing about this by any other name, right?
A rose.
Okay,
sure.
Now if you have a bunch of those, and they belong to a person named Rosa, and you want to say her apostrophe S flowers.
Rosa's roses.
Yeah. For some people, Rosa's roses be Rose's roses. And for some people, Rosa's roses.
Rosa's roses. Yeah, I think with Rosa, I think I have to have roses.
Yeah. And it's possible that because Rose is also a person's name, we put a little bit of extra emphasis on Rosa to be clear who it is, yada yada. Sure. But the point is, if you make that distinction really cleanly, that's a nice minimal pair of the reduced schwa in Rosa and the reduced I in the plural of Rose. The final link in this chain in the Northern City shift is the moving of the kit vowel toward schwa. I obviously don't have this. I am, if anything, likely to say roses, roses, and end up with two kit vowels. But for some people, they would say roses, roses, and that would be the same thing. That's the thing with these vowel shifts, is that at one end or the other, they either move into a brand new space that is otherwise unoccupied by the vowels of their language, or they end up in a merger with something. Or possibly both. Although, usually, if it's a chain shift, then it would, at one end, either pull into an existing vowel, or I guess it could fully supplant an existing vowel in some way. In this case, it has not. That's a messy area in particular because I can be either a stressed or unstressed vowel, and schwa is so close to wedge, and it's very confusing. That's the main chain of the Northern City shift. There's also a whole thing that goes on with how R affects these vowels. I'm going to leave that also as an exercise to the listener. So I want to bring this whole segment to a close by saying that this thing of the day was inspired by an email several years ago from listener Rosario. And thank you to them. They said, could you explain and show examples of the Northern shift? I feel like we've done that. Do you have it yourself? Sort of.
Yes.
Do you know if there's anything similar going on with British English or other varieties? Maybe.
I mean, almost certainly.
Almost certainly. I will admit, because we turned this into a thing of the day, we did do some research. And since I was doing that, I was like, hey, I want to look and see. Maybe there is something going on in Britain. The most recent British vowel shift that came up was the Great Vowel Shift in 1066. That doesn't mean it's not happening. It just means it's not on the first page of Google.
Very far before for the Great Vowel Shift. The Great Vowel Shift should be happening in, like, the 1500s.
Sorry, I just fucked up my English history.
There was a Great Language Shift right after 1066.
That's true. Yep. Okay. Regardless, the most recent published British vowel shift was the Great One many centuries ago. Which doesn't mean there's not one happening now. It just means it's not on the first page of Google.
Well, and there are probably small little multi-decade shifts happening everywhere in every language because, again, vowels are fluid. But one of the things about both the Great Vowel Shift and this Northern Cities shift and other sort of large shifts is the chain effect that you talked about, and the idea that it's multiple shifts that are moving pretty far pretty quickly to the point where it's sort of noticeable within a single generation, or not even that, but like within, I don't know, like academic studyable lifetime, really. These are the like earthquakes of linguistic change.
Yeah. That said, we do have some thoughts about British English, brought to us from a real language question submitted by another real listener. So if you would like to send us a question, email it in text to questions@linguisticsafterdark.com, or send us an audio recording of you speaking the question aloud, which is super handy for these types of phonology and accent questions, and just for fun. Also, as always, feel free to include your name either out loud or in IPA so we can credit you appropriately.
All right. Gladriels asks via Slack, why do British people say, I was sat there, instead of I was sitting there? Are they afraid of gerunds or something? The answer is yes. British people are afraid of gerunds.
I love that.
I have a distinction to make with this question, which is, in the phrase, I was sitting there, sitting is not a gerund. Sitting is a progressive form of the verb sit. And a gerund is when you use that ing form as a noun, So a really good example of this is if you are talking about like working out, right? I enjoy running. I enjoy swimming. You are using the progressive form of those verbs as nouns that represent that activity. That is a gerund.
Yeah. And you can see that if you study other languages, because
where gerunds are formed in other ways.
Well, right. So
well, I mean, they're not, but the noun forms that you would use are formed in other
basically,
ways.
There's two things in English. I mean, we've talked before about how English has a lot of either zero derivation or just overlapping morphology. And the thing is that in English, the ing can either be the noun nominalizing suffix to make a gerund, or it can be the adjectival suffix to make a participle, which is used in these progressive tenses.
I've been out-grammared by Sarah.
This is, in fairness, my day job.
I mean, look, that is absolutely fair. Yeah, you're right. The progressive aspect is indicated by using the participle form of the verb, which is ing in English.
And it is coincidental that in English, the noun form and the participle / progressive form happen to have the same last three letters. Great for us on spelling tests, kind of annoying when you start doing syntactic analysis. So, whether they're afraid of gerunds or participles, I couldn't say. I haven't been there. Eli says yes, so I defer to that.
But, so the question remains, like, what's going on with this I was sat there instead of I was sitting there, right? So if you look at these and you want to compare them, right, the thing that you have a difference in is you have sitting versus you have sat. And so it makes a lot of sense to be like, wait, hold on, there's like a perfectly good ing form here. Why would you use this other thing?
I have an idea.
Yeah? Do you want to...
I think I know maybe where you're going with this, but
in?
Definitely I just made a connection. Sat is the other participle of sit. In English, we have two basic participle forms. We have this present active form that means like you're so we've talked previously about active, like you're doing it, and that it's happening at the same time. And then we have typically the perfect passive form, so broken, which happened to the thing and happened in the past. It's not unreasonable, now that I think about it, to swap those out syntactically, particularly if you're in a situation where the agency or passivity of the action is ambiguous. This feels to me like that ergative other thingy we talked about in the past.
Ergative, accusative, yes. So, you are spot on for what I was going to say. And in fact, you said it in a way better way than I was going to say it, so well
Go
done.
Team.
I think that the key there, having the two participles, progressive participle, past participle, is important because it says okay, why are you going to this thing? But the key there is definitely that there is, there is a agency confusion, or there's sort of a, like you said, a passivity or a patientness to this kind of role here. Because I think if you try to do this with other things, right? If you say I was run along the street, right? Or you said broken, I was broken to concrete blocks for my... No, those are things where the action is really clear. But I also think in this particular instance, it's a little bit... I wouldn't call it an idiom. It might be a little... Not ossified because it's clearly a dialect thing, it's clearly a choice. But I think it's really influenced by sat being close to set and sort of saying I was set down. I sat myself down. I set myself down. You could say the thing was set on the table. You can also say in some dialects the thing was sat on the table. And there's a interplay there also.
I would not be surprised at all about that. Sit and set as lexemes are absolutely related, and they are related in the same way as lay and lie, where one of them is causative of the other. And we have very few of those pairs left in modern English, but it is unsurprising that in a pair like that, where there is that relationship, that they would start to have these blurry lines.
And that causal passive alternation goes again back to the unergative unaccusative thing. It goes back to the passivity thing. And I would not be surprised to hear I was laid there.
Exactly.
As I was on the sidewalk waiting for somebody to come,
run me over with their bike. I don't know why else you would be lying on a sidewalk.
This is a total tangent, but there was a paper that came out probably 10 or 15 years ago that was all about instances of violence in linguistics example sentences.
It's so true.
Yes.
It's so true. I have come up with so many stupid example sentences in class. My high school Latin teacher, his go-to example was about kicking puppies.
Because why not? It'll keep the kids engaged.
And I have said so many other horrible, violent things. And sure, it's Latin. We have a million words for kill, yada, yada, yada. But I come up with the most awful example sentences. And some of my students just look at me and they're like, what is wrong with you? And I'm like, I don't know, man. A lot of really good transitive verbs are violent, okay?
I mean, the thing is it's true,
like,
though.
Violence
you have
is
like a very clear...
almost obligatorily transitive. It has to be done by somebody to somebody, even if it's the same person. Like, if I smack myself.
And there's often an instrument. There's often... I mean, it's like, they're just very...
They're so useful.
They're very useful verbs.
Episode title, Violence is Useful.
Oh.
Anyway,
I think that you've hit it spot on. And I don't know, are there other... Nothing is coming to mind, but are there other pairs like that we could think of?
What's the word that you used when we were talking about ergativity? Like, we were talking about standee and, like, escapee. Why do those people end in EE even though they're the agent?
So I think it's because that's the sort of... You've got -er, which is an agent making suffix, and you've got -ee, which is like a patient making suffix.
Oh, but those are the
right?
verbs that don't have an agent, right?
Right. So, like, I escape does not...
Well, and sit, then, is the same thing.
Yeah.
Sit, stand...
You don't sit something else.
Right?
Yeah.
Those are the same. Those can only be the kind of reflexive middle voice.
Well, and I've heard I was stood there in the same way as I was sat there.
I think this is much more likely, possibly even limited to, these intransitive, reflexive feeling verbs, because like you said, I was run along the street very much makes it sound like somebody is chasing you.
I think I would probably also, because I'm trying to think of some of these other constructions, and I think there's probably also something here with sort of older verbs, that are quote-unquote strong verbs, that are that kind of like consonant, vowel, consonant. They have been in the language for a while. They have these verb pairs. They have ablaut for their conjugation.
Yeah.
And so you get that. It doesn't sort of feel right to do this with like a -en construction.
Well, also a lot of the en words are transitive, where if you swap them, you're actually making a claim about the agency and patiency of...
Or like even like a -ed.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I'm trying to think about like, I was escaped, right?
I mean, I could say...
I was arrived at the bus stop. Maybe?
You know what else this reminds me of?
I don't hate it.
Yeah, like it's not in my idiolect, but I would understand it.
Sure.
In a way that if you said, I was stopped at the bus stop, feels different. I mean, maybe, but...
But stopped is also, it's got a lot more
sort of
adjective-y.
I was surprised at the bus stop. Very much feels like someone surprised or something caused me surprise rather than I surprised myself.
Like, that's fine, but I think that's also, like, you're getting into, I don't know, past perfect almost.
And I think that with a verb that is even possibly transitive, that can have, even if it's not obligatory, but can have a separate agent and patient argument, you immediately introduce syntactic ambiguity if you use that phrasing. But sit stand and stop, but sit and stand and lie and lay and all of their related forms are
unambiguous
in that context, yeah.
Here's the other thing, though. None of the other usages ping British to me. And I would not expect anybody not from that island to say, I was stood there, I was sat there.
So yes, and okay, so two things. One, even among British speakers, they wouldn't do this with these other verbs, I think. I'm not British, but I haven't heard them do it, at least. There's a them for you, by the way. Secondly, there are other participial differences between North American and UK English.
That's true.
That are not a tense or an aspect difference, but like the kind of iconic one is got versus gotten, or forgot versus forgotten. So I would say in most of North America, it's acceptable to say, I've got to do something in the sense of I need to. Or but to say, oh, I've got a letter from someone. To me, in North American English,
British.
Is like, I have it, but not I have received it.
Right,
oh,
exactly.
I forgot that already. I'm sorry. What? But that's so British. That's a very normal thing in a lot of British dialects. So it's not surprising to me either that this particular weird participle phrasing is there's
some participle fuckery
geographical difference. But I think even within the regions where this is accepted, there's going to be limitations based on the qualities and other characteristics of the verbs.
All right, well, Gladriels, there is your answer. British people say that because they have slightly different conceptions of how participles work than we do, and they are afraid of gerunds because that's who invaded their island in 1066.
That means we have to keep the bit about me messing up history.
I know.
Very good.
I could do an alternate one.
No. That's great. Strategic callback to keep in the nonsense. Love when podcasters do that.
All right. Shall we move on to the second question?
Yeah. So, previously mentioned friend of the show, Bex, asked via email, I've noticed distinctions between how numbers are pluralized and ordinalized, not only between languages, but within them. So, in general, English uses ST for numbers that end in 1, like first, ND for numbers that end in 2, like second, RD for numbers that end in 3, like third, and TH for everything else, including 11th, 12th, and 13th, because those are weird. But in English, the pluralization rules are just 1 and not 1. So how come 2 and 3 have these separate things for ordinalization that plurality doesn't have? And I'm adding this on here, but why are 11, 12, and 13 different than the other 1, 2, and 3 numbers? And then Beck said, how do these distinctions evolve?
Well, so the first thing that I'll say is, Sarah, you paraphrased the question a little bit, which I think made sense because I put it in a different order. But I will shout out that Bex wrote this question in the order that you would write the if statements if you were writing computer code that was trying to figure out what suffix to use given the number. I know you did that on purpose. I see you. So my first look at this was it's because English is secretly base 12, but that's actually not the case here at all because we've got this weird 13 thing happening. And we've got the weird 3 thing happening. My thought about this is 1, 2, and 3 are used so often that they ended up getting weird words that then got different ordinals. I kind of actually think the pluralization is a red herring here. I think there's no reason pluralization and ordinals would have anything to do with each other.
I would agree with that.
I don't think English has ever had a dual or a trual or a paucal form. I think it's always been singular and plural. There might have been a dual at some point.
I think there was, but I think it was
dual.
Limited case, yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's a bit of a red herring, actually. The two things are not related, which also makes sense because these are ordinals, they're not cardinals.
Well, I have some thoughts about second and third. I don't know about first. I'm going to have to think about that one a lot.
Well, so second is a Latin thing, right?
Right, so we were just talking about participles. Latin had 2 words. I mean, it had, like, a proper word that meant second, which...
I mean, hopefully Latin had more than 2.
That is true. Latin had many words. About 1,000 of them mean kill. That's a joke. But the Latin number for 2 is duo. And in some modern Romance language, you can see the word for second is based on that. In French, you have deuxième, the second thing. And Latin had that word as well. But I think in poetry and possibly just in other uses and what came to be predominant in some dialects, was the participle of the word follow. So you started counting first, following, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh. And so second,
and you could do like sequential,
just fully
you could get, like,
supplanted the form that actually was based off the number 2, which is why 2 and second are completely unrelated, because they are legitimately, in every language that uses those two forms, unrelated. So we can take that and just be like, humans made a weird choice one time and now we're stuck with it. Moving on. Third, I have some ideas. I'm not super confident. And this is, again, fully based in Latin, which is not to say that these numbers are derived, other than second, from the Latin numbers, but rather we've talked before about the historical, I think we talked about Grimm's Law and some of the parallels across languages that have evolved in parallel to each other, but diverging. And what I'm thinking of here is that the Latin ordinal for 3 is tertius, which has a vowel before the suffix, whereas all the others are quartus, quintus, sextus, just very, very consonantal. And I think we've also talked previously about how ti has a tendency to soften and shift into lots of other different pronunciations. So it is not surprising to me that something way, 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 way back in the day that in Latinate languages went toward tertius, tertia, tertiary, those types of words, went in English to third, and then just cut off at the consonant, rather than applying this more productive TH rule. I can almost imagine how threeth would turn into third if you just sort of metastasize a few of the consonants.
So you are right, but you're wrong. Because I happen to know this thing about third because it's mentioned in the History of English podcast episode about numbers.
Dude, it's been at least 2 episodes since we shouted them out. That's a record.
That's true. So you're right, it's metathesis. Okay, cool. So it is changing around, but it's much, much older. So that THR, that th-r, is from before the Latin Germanic split.
Oh, I'm not surprised about that at all.
So
yeah.
We get 3 through Germanic and through Old English and so on. But that's also where third comes from. It just happens to have had a metathesis happen at some point. So it's not coming over from Latin or a Latin language. It's coming from the Germanic side, but there was a metathesis.
Yeah, I did not expect that it actually came from Latin. That's just where I had to be like, there's something weird about this number compared to the rest of them.
So it seems like there was a parallel metathesis, but it seems like third is easier to say than thrid.
No kidding.
But I also think, so kind of knowing how Old English goes, it was probably like thridde or thridda or something. And so you could definitely get 3 out of that. Yeah. But I think thrid would probably pretty quickly become third. Yeah. As for first, I'm pretty sure that first is just like all the way back to PIE. Like it's first, fjorst, first. It's probably at some point first or whatever. There's probably a P at some point.
So that then brings me to my next question, because I was also thinking about this with Latin as, again, not a source, but a parallel, a source of comparison, because the ordinal in Latin is primus, and like P and F make sense together.
Yeah, so I would pre versus
you got
fear.
That thing. Some sound switching going on there. Got that. But in neither English nor Latin do we understand where one or unus got to first or primus. And is that just a humans had 2 words for this and now we're here, or do you know a better explanation?
I think it is just the concept of one has and like first are like not distinct enough, but like they come up enough that they can have a distinction between them, and you could have 2 different words. So you've got one that comes from the un family, you've got first that comes from the first side. And And then I also remember looking this up because I was curious about it at some point, which is -th is also basically unchanged back to PI.
Nice.
And then if we go and we deal with 11 and 12 and 13, I think that it's purely sort of phonetic, right? Like, you don't have
because
anything to put
11, 12, and 13 have 1, 2, and 3 sort of somewhere in their
That's right.
stems, but not in their endings. Their endings are 10.
Well, and even if you're thinking about, like, I mean, yeah, that's exactly what I was saying, is their endings are 10. And so
the rule for 10 is 10th, and so
3/10.
3/10, 2/10, 1/10, 4/10.
Well, 11 and 12 don't end in 10. 11 and 12 come from 1 leftover and 2 leftover.
Okay, but still, it's 1 something, 2 something, so you're not going to apply the 1 and 2 rules.
Well, and the rest of that decade has N that ends
right,
in
so 13,
NTH,
14,
so.
yeah. So 13 is because 10 uses TH,
Right,
so
exactly.
that 1 and 2 are that because they don't have, and basically same thing as 13, they don't have the special case 1, 2, and 3 ending.
Exactly.
And so you just apply the default.
Yep.
Cool.
There you go, Bex. That's why that is that way. I do think it's interesting. Our conversations on this show sometimes are sort of like a microcosm of what doing like linguistic research and answering linguistic questions is, where you like notice a phenomenon and then we skip over the like verify that that's an actual phenomenon, design an experiment, gather the actual data, and we go right to the like end of the paper where we're like, hey, here's like some syntax trees and some like vowel diagrams and an explanation for this. That's probably right.
That's true.
More research is needed.
That's true.
And then
we do the fun. I mean, this is true.
We do the fun bit.
With great gratitude to our Patreon subscribers. Y'all are paying for our microphones, not our actual jobs, right? Like, we're doing this for fun, so we're doing the fun part of the paper. We're not doing the detailed research. That's our whole timeline.
We're just assuming we're taking the question for granted.
And then doing the analysis. That's like, yeah.
I guess except for this question where I told Bex that like the pluralization is a red herring and don't worry about that.
That's part of it too. Because, I mean, all right, so Bex's question was, why are plural and ordinal different? Because they're different. Like,
because they're not
the same. Because, slight tangent, but it is mostly on topic. There's no reason for plural and ordinal numbers, for those rules to be at all related.
Exactly.
In some languages, there's not even consistency among types of numbers within the type of number. And again, as we've said before, and I'm sure we'll say again, languages and writing systems, not the same thing. However, I have said before, and I will say again, that the Romans as people were great at a ton of things, and math was none of them. Ready? So I'm not going to give you the Latin words. I'm just going to like translate all of these. But here's how you count in Latin, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 10, 2, 10, 3, 10, 4, 10, 5, 10, 6, 10, 7, 10. 20 minus 2, 20 minus 1, 21, 22, 23, yada, yada, yada. 30 minus 2, 30 minus 1, yada, yada, yada. And so forth. Cool. That's weird.
This explains the Ides thing.
It does. They were really big fans of counting backwards. I don't know why. But for those of you who are at all familiar with Roman numerals.
Oh, yeah, okay.
But how do you write 8 in Roman numerals?
Oh, yeah, so 8 is like VIII.
5 plus 3.
It's not IIX.
But how do you say that? 10 minus 2.
Although, I would not be surprised if there were places where you saw 8 as IIX.
I wouldn't be either. But the fact that the persistent numeral form, and the form that we see most often in the official engravings of big fancy buildings, is that when you write it, 8 is 5 plus 3, but when you say it out loud, 8 is 10 minus 2, is some bullshit. That is worse than whatever modern French is doing.
Man, those Romans makes you feel things about the Punic Wars. There you go.
Look, there was a reason that even among the Romans, they did their math in Greek. That's all I'm saying. Again, my point is, humans are not like computers. You wrote this beautiful question in the order of a computer if statement. Here's the most limited constraint. Here's the next condition. Here's the next condition. If it's anything else, add th. Humans don't do that. Humans do whatever the fuck they feel like and then look back on it later and say, well, that was dumb. Oh well.
They usually skip the
That's
was
true.
dumb bit, too.
That's true. Anyway.
We should talk about English being secretly base 12 at some point, also.
Ooh, let's do number systems as a thing of the day one day.
Yeah. Okay.
I will write that down.
Cool. Thank you.
Anyway, on to question
yes,
3.
Please tell us.
So, Elijah asks via email, what are the features of real languages that made you go, I can't believe it's not a conlang?
On the one hand, all of them. On the other hand...
Is it bad Roman counting?
Oh, so true.
And bad French number systems?
On the one hand, yes. And on the other hand, I've met humans, and so I'm 0% surprised that we've made those stupid choices. So here's the thing, right? Like, there are some things that I see, and I'm like, whoa, that's so cool. I can't believe someone come up with that. But also, I've seen so many of those things at this point, I'm like, yeah, all of those are possible.
Well, so it's interesting because I was thinking about this question. I think the first reading of this question is like, what's a really weird thing that you've seen in a language that you're like, some recreational conlanger has come up with this? But the other kind of conlang that often happens is the like Lojban kind of conlang, where it's like, I'm going to try to take the entire universe and like make it
so
regular.
Like where you have legitimate natural human languages that are actually that law-abiding?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure Elijah did not mean this reading of the question. I think there's a reading of this question where it's like, what's something that you've seen where you're like, a human designed that?
Okay, do you have an answer to that version?
I don't. I mean, the things that I think of, like a human design, like Hangul is a great writing system because King Sejong sat down and was like, we need a better writing system.
That's true.
To a certain extent, I think that verb conjugation in Japanese kind of hits this for me. When you learn it, you kind of learn it piecemeal. And then I think if you are the kind of person who thinks about this a lot, or if your teacher teaches this to you, you eventually kind of realize that like there is a verb conjugation for I, U, A, and O, like all 5 of the vowels that they have. And there's multiples for some of them. But you then sort of start looking for them and trying to figure out how do I like associate. And it is the kind of thing where you might expect like a conlanger to have been like, okay, this language has 5 vowels and we're going to like do verb endings. And so each verb ending is going to like have a different vowel associated to the consonant on the stem. I am vastly oversimplifying, by the way. This is for one kind of Japanese verb. It's possibly the most common type. Each vowel that gets attached to the stem is going to like be a different aspect or tense derivation kind of a thing. And so if you have that realization, then you could start to restructure your thought in something that's a little more systematic rather than kind of memorizing in the one-off.
Okay, so you've inspired 2 other thoughts of mine. In Latin, there are... So we've talked about noun classes, which in a lot of European languages get called genders. But Latin has another type of noun class, which is why I have some sympathy for the concept of giving things genders, because if you've already started numbering that type of noun class, then numbering the gender noun class is just very confusing. It's just had a lot of...
This noun has class B12. You sunk my battleship.
It's like a fucking vitamin or something. So as much as like the fallout of the gender system has had like a lot, it's caused a lot of confusion in modern European languages, I have a lot of sympathy for why they chose that the first time. But the other type of noun class in Latin is spelling classes. And we call them declensions. In classical Latin, like in the spelling system and the writing system that was in use around, say, Julius Caesar's time or the fake year 0 or whatever, there had been a number of vowel shifts in Latin, and so the spelling system was no longer as perfect as we've identified it to be in the past, although I guess in that case, the spelling was still representing these pronunciation shifts. You don't see the derivation as much anymore, which I know is a trade-off we've talked about previously in terms of English. But way back in the day, the 5 Latin spelling classes were vowels A, O, I, U, E, in that order, because reasons. It doesn't strike you immediately because of the different pronunciation shifts, so the O declension has a ton of I's and U's in it now, and the I declension has a ton of E's in it, and it's kind of weird. But every once in a while, I step back and I think, yeah, they just kind of accidentally sorted every noun in their language into the 5 cardinal vowels. That's wild!
And this is a thing that I think tends to happen in a few different... Like, it is wild. It's absolutely wild. And I love that you've got a thing in Latin that's using the 5 cardinal vowels. You've got a thing in Japanese that's using the 5 cardinal vowels to do these sort of, like, if we're going to do for one, or for 2 or 3 of them, let's, like, do it for all 5.
Right, and no matter what the conspiracy theorists say, the Romans and the ancient Japanese, like, did not know each other. That's not a thing.
That's true, yes.
Like, no.
That's an official Linguistics After Dark stance. If you look, you would see other languages where they have a set of cardinal vowels. There are usually 5, but sometimes there's 3, sometimes there's other systems. Yeah. And I would expect to see other systems where it's like, okay, cool. If it's this vowel, it's that. If it's that, it's that.
And the thing about English kind of tied in with the things we've talked about before about zero derivation and parts of speech are fake and blah, 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 which they're not. They just seem that way in English, is we don't sort anything by vowel. We don't sort anything by spelling. Any spelling can be whatever you want within reason.
Yeah, that's true.
But a lot of other languages...
We have some stuff that's like suffix-based.
Right, there are suffixes that are like
bit.
Really obviously... I mean, like we said earlier, if something is ing, it's either the conceptual noun gerund, or it's the
actual action as a verb.
Actual action, you are doing it right now. I can't be like, yes, I spoying frequently. What?
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that way, but I think that it is connected with this like zero derivation thing where it's like we don't have a system to latch into, and so we just have decided no system. Our system is...
And then we look at these other languages
context.
That without, not in a conlangy way, there was no, as far as I'm aware, bring me a time machine, we can talk, but as far as I'm aware, there was no ancient Japanese person and no ancient Roman person who sat down and said, let us sort all of these words into the 5 vowels. People just collectively over generations
figured out that this was a good way to do it.
And the English speakers over generations collectively decided, nah, fuck it. Which, like, sure, but so then to us as native English speakers, anyone who collectively over generations came up with anything even remotely systematic, there's a degree to which you're like, sounds fake, but okay.
I mean, I guess that's true. I think for me, it's not just like, oh, it's systematic, but the sort of completeness of it. Right?
It's not just systematic, but it's complete. Like, you filled all the gaps.
The example that leaps to mind for me for the Japanese thing, I'm going to leave some stuff out. Sorry, people who actually speak Japanese. For it's the negative. For E, it's your mas form. For A, you've got potential form. For U, that's the stem. And I had not yet been taught the volitional form, which is O. So I remember asking my teacher, I was like, wait a second, does this thing mean anything? Right? And he was like, oh yeah, it's like the let's go do it thing, or the like, it's the volitional form. And I was like, hey, okay, there are 5 of them, yay!
First of all, that's beautiful. Second of all, you've just blown my mind in the minimal amount of Japanese study I've done. That is going to make my life so much better now that I uttered, like, just that sentence you've uttered.
Glad. I am curious about the flip side of this question. Is there something that is so weird and wacky that you have encountered that you're like, this is the construction of an evil person from the past? Must be.
There's the Roman and French counting systems. But
Sure.
Not that this is a thing from the past, but these are two other things that had come to mind. I don't know quite where they fit in the scope of this whole discussion, but one of the things that to me as a native English speaker that I can intellectually agree is a thing people could hear and make a distinction about. And yet, naturally, I would need so much exposure and practice to actually use in any kind of useful way, is languages where the quality of voicing is semantically important.
Yeah. That absolutely just stinks of, like, I was looking at the IPA table and no one's ever used this thing before, have they?
And then there's, like, 17 languages that are like, hello, we're right here. The fucking New Yorker and Slate, and I don't mean any of that as a disparagement of them, but those magazines that love to just, like, ooh, here's a cool thing people are talking about kind of articles. They're all like, oh, vocal fry. Like, well, this way that people talk is so annoying. And to be fair, that tone of voice drives me nuts. That is a personal pet peeve of mine. That is not a judgment on anybody who speaks that way. It just, for reasons of my own brain chemistry, literally causes me pain, and I hate it. Also, I've accepted that people are going to keep doing it, and I'm just going to get over it.
My son right now, by the way, a lot of his utterances have vocal fry, actually. So I've been like, what are you, a teenage Californian girl? Like,
he's suddenly aged 13 years and moved across the continent.
Yeah, exactly.
That's amazing.
No words
no
yet,
words,
but the vocal
just the
fry
vocal
he's
fry.
got down.
But there are languages where saying whatever dad and whatever dad are literally completely different statements, not just a tone of voice. And I intellectually understand that, and also that is the type of detail that to me as an English speaker is like some conlanger put that in there.
And to be clear, it will be vowel by vowel, so you'll have different qualities within the word. But yeah, it's such a, like, tone of voice thing and the social
pragmatic overtone thing in English. Yeah.
Yeah. For me, I think the thing that I'm just kind of like, someone went too nuts with this is Finnish cases. And any language that just has, like, more than 5 cases.
True.
I'm like, no one could remember all of those, which is patently false, right? Like, Finns speak their language totally fine. You could have stopped at 5. 5 is a nice number for cases, right?
What blows my mind about the Finnish cases is that, based on my very cursory research several years ago, so, fact check me if you like, a lot of them are still tied to prepositions. So I'm like, if you have these obligatory preposition words, why do you also have 17 endings?
Well, the answer, which I'm not going to do in a Finnish accent, is because we don't want to be English, clearly.
Sure, but I'm like, cases are useful because they free you from prepositions. Prepositions are useful because they free you from cases. Why do you have
what if I want both?
But hey, Finland, you do you.
But yeah, any of these, like, just tons and tons of cases, or, like, making a distinction between, like, using something versus, like, doing something, any of these, like, very fine case distinctions, it really just seems to me like somebody was doing that sitting at their desk and they were, like, writing a really overwrought RPG rule set, But if you're carrying something in your other hand, then all of a sudden you need to roll a different set of dice, right? It's
the other one that's not, to me, like, overwrought in any of these ways, but is still just such a funny fact about the world that I'm like, this is something that a weird human would decide just to be a troll. We've talked before about wuggability and what are the patterns. So, like, we were talking earlier about, like, nth, like, the th ordinalization suffix is super wuggable. Right. The most wuggable type of verb in German is the smallest type of verb by token number. So, like, in English, we think of ed as the kind of generic, basic way to past tense a verb. It's also, probably in English, the most common way to do that. We have a ton of ed verbs. I don't speak German. This is according to one of my professors in college. I haven't found the study that backs this up, but I trust them. And if this is true, then it absolutely feels like a thing a weird human would decide and be like, yes, the default past tensive verb in this language will also be the least commonly used type of past tense verb. It will just be the one we use for every frickin' wug. Because reasons.
That's nuts. Although, it does also make me think of the fact that English just uses zero derivation for most of its stuff.
True.
That's an insane conlanger.
True. That is like a legitimately insane conlanger.
Yeah, I'm not doing any grammar for this. Are you kidding?
Right.
Just keep using the same word. It's fine. People will know what you mean.
Or it's almost like the inverse of that, because I feel like so many conlangers are like you said with like Lojban, like they're gonna like way
suffixes
over-engineer everything. And English was just like, we could, but what if we just don't?
This is a conlanger who like looked at Tokipona and was like, I'll do that, but not as much.
It's like the world's laziest conlanger invented English.
All right, Elijah, that's 2 questions for the price of 1.
Nicely done. Thank you.
I'm curious what people's answers to this is, because I think there's probably some folks out there who A, know languages that we don't, but B, know a bunch of conlangs that we don't.
Please email us.
Write
tweet
in.
At us.
Tell us what your...
Message us on Instagram. I don't know how to make sentences. Tell us your thoughts.
All right, let's move on to last episode's puzzle.
So, last podcast, our puzzler was, what do the English words uncopyrightable and dermatoglyphics have in common?
So I figured this one out during recording last time, and I'm very proud of figuring it out. I haven't peeked at the answer. I don't know if it's right, but I think it's right, which is, I think these are words that all contain each orthographic English vowel once.
That is true, but it is not the whole answer.
Once and only once?
The whole answer is they are the longest English words that have no repeated glyphs of any kind.
Oh. Okay.
So
all
yes,
right.
They have, I think, all the vowels, but they also have a heck ton of consonants. I think 10 consonants, actually, to be precise.
I wonder if they are the longest words that have
I believe they are.
I, O, U, and Y each in them once.
Okay, yes, I didn't think about Y. So 9.5 consonants. But these are certainly the longest agreed upon words that have no repeated letters.
With no repeat letters. Very cool. All right, I was wrong.
I mean, you were not wrong, but you were just not all the way there.
You weren't wrong. You just weren't right.
Yeah. Anyway, if you figured out that they were super long, non-repeating letter words, good job. Proud of you. Today's puzzler I bring to you again from GCHQ's puzzler files, specifically the page about how to entertain yourself while stuck at home during COVID, and more specifically, the Week 9 puzzle, which I will read out loud right now, but I found their graphic display of this puzzle a little bit easier to follow than the verbal one, so once this episode goes live, we will copy that image and put it on our social media. The puzzle is, when we, presumably GCHQ, quizzed a group of musical artists about their favorite Pokemon, there were no surprises. I take several points of umbrage with that whole sentence, but here's what they say.
What a sentence.
I truly.
Just what a, all right.
Let's file that under sentences can be novel, whatever that hashtag was back in the day. Daniel Merriweather said Charizard. Eiffel 65 chose Blastoise. Coldplay said Pikachu. Spandau Ballet chose Ho-Oh. Echo and the Bunnymen said Lugia. And New Order said Suicune. Jenny, how do you say that Pokemon?
I'm not actually sure because I don't know if it would be like Americanized or not.
So it's Suicune.
Suicune. Okay,
cool.
New Order said Suicune. The question is, what answer did the Kaiser Chiefs give?
Man, I have no clue.
I've only heard of half of these artists. And I've heard of all of the Pokemon but Suicune.
I guess I've heard of almost all the Pokemon. This is nuts. This is like a puzzle hunt puzzle.
Right, and here's the thing, is all of the GCHQ puzzles have a a thing in the top corner that says Enigma Rotor Scale. Like, how hard do they think this puzzle is? They rated this as family friendly, level 1.
Okay, so I want to look at this for a second. There's nothing here where, like, the vowels are the same between 1 and 2. There's nothing where, like, as far as I am aware, like, Eiffel 65 is not secretly a turtle that shoots water. There's even, like, Bunny is in one of these, and Lugia is not a bunny. I'm pretty sure.
Not that I'm aware of. Blastoise is not number 65.
Are you sure? Because I'm pretty sure Blastoise is one of the 101.
It's really early.
The 151.
Because it's an evolution of the first 3 starters.
Yeah, it's like 9.
I'm gonna have to go do some research about these people's songs. But also, there's like 900 Pokemon. Oh man. Okay, well, we seem to have stumped all of us on this first go, which is nice.
I think I have it. It did take me one Wikipedia of the Kaiser Chiefs to look at them, but I think I have it.
Okay, well, write down your thought somewhere, because we've definitely encountered the thing where we said on one episode we knew the answer and then forgot it within the time it took us to record the next one. But I'll think about this over the next month, and we'll see where we get. But yeah, I'm gonna have to go Wikipedia most of these names.
Oh, I just got part of the way there, I think. We'll see.
I haven't verified anything, but I just found out that the Pokemon that in French is called Pusacha, which I think has to do with, like, tea-colored cat. I could be wrong. In English, is called Sprigatito, which is a name that I hate, actually. Although Quaxley is a great name.
All right, this isn't Pokemon After Dark.
Add that to the list. That is it for this episode. Thanks for listening.
Linguistics After Dark is produced by M. Fozing Enterprises. Audio editing is done by Luca. Question wrangling is done by Jenny. And show notes and transcriptions are a team effort. Our music is Covert Affair by Kevin MacLeod.
Our show is entirely listener-supported. You can help us by visiting patreon.com/mfozing, EMFOZZING, and by telling your friends about us. Ratings on iTunes, Spotify, etc. help as well and get the show in front of new people.
Every episode, we thank patrons and reviewers. Today, we want to say thanks to these awesome patrons: Elijah, Dash, Andy, Jason, Bex, and Dre. Thank you.
Find all our episodes and show notes online at linguisticsafterdark.com or on all your favorite podcast directories. And send your questions, text or audio, to questions@linguisticsafterdark.com. You can reach us on all the usual socials at LX80 Podcast. And if you don't find us on your platform of choice, let us know. We're also on Slack at the-crossings.slack.com, and a link to that is on our website. Please join us.
And until next time, if you weren't consciously aware of your tongue in your mouth, now you are.
You know what? We're gonna try that again. I need to go figure out what's making a very loud sound in the other room. Sorry, my cat just deleted most of the episode outline. Also, I don't know if you want to redo the very beginning of that, but you said he recorded him saying it.
Yeah, he recorded for me, him saying it.
I thought that was a correction, not a double object. Great.
Oh, no. That was double object. He recorded
me.
Like, he recorded for me, him saying it.
Carry on. Me saying Northern Shitties Sift. Or actually, just keep that whole thing and we can put me on blast for not knowing history. That's fine. I was gonna say something clever and then I didn't.
I was gonna make a joke that wasn't actually funny.
The Norman conquest is not when the Great Vowel Shift happened, no matter what Sarah says.
Wait, I'm sorry. I fucked up that reading. I'm gonna try that whole thing again. I love when we actually have a real factual answer to something as opposed to just either theorizing or completely bullshitting. Not that I don't love those. But I feel like we've accomplished a thing where it's like, oh, we actually knew a fact without looking it up. Chip chip! Now my house won't flood anymore. From that source, at least.
Spoken like a true homeowner.
And the English speakers over generations collectively decided, nah, fuck it. The cat has not escaped. All is well. Dear editor, whoever you are at this point in time, I love you. Thank you for doing this job so that I don't have to. Humans made a weird choice one time. It was a good time for me to go cat hunting.